Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Hinkle. It's my privilege to chair the Post Commission. We are pleased to welcome two new commissioners today, Deborah Hall and Clyde Talley, who were sworn in within the last 2 days. They will replace Commissioner West and Commissioner Sherry, and we are very grateful to the latter two for their dedicated service as commissioners. And I think with that, let me call the meeting to order formally and ask each of the commissioners to indicate presence. May I go in alphabetical order on this, please? Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Here.
Commissioner Calderon.
Here. Good morning, all.
Commissioner Ellison.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Hall.
Present.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
Morning, present.
Commissioner Luma.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Talley.
Present.
So we obviously have a forum. All 9 commissioners are in attendance. With that, I turn to the agenda and is there a motion to approve the minutes of the July 12th and the August 8th meetings, August 10th, excuse me, meetings? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? If not, let me ask for a vote, please. Commissioner Baker? To the extent you were present, do you approve? That was the second meeting.
Yeah, I wasn't present in July, but the second one I can approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Approve.
Mr. Calderon?
Yes, approved.
Commissioner Ellison?
Approved.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Yes, approved.
And Commissioner Luma, I believe you were present for the first and not the second.
Yes, I approve July. Thank you.
And I approve both of them. With that, the meeting's minutes are approved. I turn now to the Executive Director report. Enrique, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, commissioners. Warm welcome to Commissioner Hall and Commissioner Talley. It's nice to have you, and we look forward to working with you on behalf of all of the staff. Welcome. I'm going to turn to what I normally do, which is a PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen for the Executive Director report. So you just give me one minute. Can everybody see this? So I will be providing today a certification update. I want to do that brief in a summary way because there's a good important discussion to be had as part of the second agenda item, which is an update on the disciplinary records. Finally, from my report, I'll turn it over to Eric Rivello-Pradas, our CFO, to provide a quick and brief update on finance and administration. Last month, this is the progress of the certification efforts that we have since the June 30th deadline. Commissioners here can see the progress being made throughout these different months. And you can see that now we have all agencies that need to be reporting having reported. We have a good sense of all those, the number of people that need to be recertified, and that stands at 5,645 individuals. The Division of Certification has now ascertained that that number is really the number that needs to be, that constitutes all those that need to be recertified. You can see that some individuals in our rosters prior to this date included non-sworn individual officers or officers who have exited the system. They either retired in good standing and did so without the possibility of doing details, or were previously certified as a recent graduate of the academy. So This 5,645 number is a number that we can feel confident is the group of people that needed to be recertified, whose name were I through P. Moving on to the next slide. This slide represents the progress that is being made also since the first two reports. Figures worth highlighting here are the relative number of individuals in a category other than certified or conditionally certified is very small, an aggregate of 3.1%. Or put another way, those that are in compliance with the certification requirements or are perhaps only missing a technical requirement represent the vast majority of the officers in this cohort at 96.6%. Another thing I want to highlight in this slide is that Post has sent 3,667 certification letters, all of them from the category of certified individuals, and will continue processing those certifications in the coming days. We have done so with the use of our new portal, and that is working smoothly and as expected. A final point to make in this slide is that even though these are still provisional certification results, the Post has a very high degree of confidence that these officers in this category have been verified for compliance with the requirements of the statute and in compliance with what we expected to process. I'm going to turn on to the topic of disciplinary records. It will take a few slides, and I can, of course, take any questions from commissioners at any point, or I'll make a pause after this update to have a discussion about this important and timely topic. Since our last meeting, Post released the first batch of data of historical disciplinary records. I want to start giving an overview of the process of validation because I believe that that begins to explain some of the reasons for data not yet being published. It also provides an important context for the discussion that we should have. The validation efforts for Post centered around matching an exact match of an officer existing in our Post database with the spreadsheets that were submitted regarding disciplinary records by those agencies. The match had to be where the match was not an exact match of the name, the date of birth, or the NPTC ID number, which is a unique identifier, and or there was missing or overwritten data, and I'll explain that in a minute, it would cause the record not to be migrated. What I mean by overwritten data is in many cases in that template for submission, there was an expected value, in other words, a drop-down value that agencies were required to select. In some cases, there may have been an overwrite of those fields, and that happened, frankly, even though the worksheet was protected and was not meant to happen. Notwithstanding that, that's the reason for some records not being migrated. We knew about this through our efforts, and we went back and forth with agencies asking them to correct and resubmit those records, in some instances more than a couple of times. Once those records are migrated, some of those fields require certain redactions. Of course, we never publish something like the date of birth, but there are instances in which there is query-related information, and that requires redaction. I would mention this because it adds to the process and the logistics of how we publish this data, and it's something that everybody should understand that it's not a live database. It's a download that we need to then validate and redact, and then upload into our website. By the way, I would also mention that prior to the release, Post discovered several duplicates due to the multiple migrations, but we always knew about these. We worked to exclude those duplicate entries, and that's another part of the process for validation. Notwithstanding all those validation efforts, and very shortly after that release, we were notified that some records required corrections. We have had conversations with 4 groups. Those are the major city chiefs, the mass chiefs, M.G.L, which is the Association of Law Enforcement Individuals in Colleges and Universities, and the Fraternal Order of Police. And they have all asked that we take the report down until those corrections are effectively are done or corrected. We've studied this matter carefully, but my recommendation is not to take them down and continue correcting and adding to the reports in accordance with the process that we have implemented, which I will describe to you further. I understand where they're coming from. We believe that it's still the vast majority of records are appropriately validated and updated, and we'll continue to work with those corrections. But I did want to highlight that those organizations represent more than a few people, of course, have asked for that, and it's something that this commission should consider. Let me mention also that there are certain categories for corrections that we prioritize for obvious reasons, where the record had been submitted to us properly and validated, but it was actually a record that was not sustained, or the discipline was reversed, or vacated, or reduced. That is something that we have clearly prioritized and worked to change and update. I'll remind commissioners that this data was submitted as of January 31st of this year. And in some instances, that the data submitted by then resulted in something in the officer's favor since then, an update, a reversal, a vacated record, or a reduction of discipline. And again, this is something that we have worked to correct and resolve quickly. And frankly, a handful of these instances was what these organizations pointed to as a way to say, well, there needs to be updates to this database. So I'll remind also commissioners that the publication of this data was August 22nd, almost the day after the subsequent days. We began to have these conversations with chiefs, etc. Noticed the need for these corrections and issued the first correction or updated data on September 1st. The team worked very hard to log all of these requests. They all came to our general mailbox for these purposes, and ensure that in fact they needed to be corrected with perhaps information that they sent us, decisions about reversals, etc. And again, worked to make those corrections by September 1st. I will mention that this effort is still ongoing. The requests for corrections have tapered off a little bit, but we anticipate that the approach will continue to be updating this report periodically. I will also want to mention that we envision future releases for data that is not yet published, We know where it is. We know the reasons why it wasn't migrated, and we planned for periodic releases, perhaps on a monthly basis for the next couple of months. This was also another reason, by the way, that chiefs mentioned in the request for breaking down their the database. Records that were not submitted represented to them, claims of unfairness, let's say, within the ranks about people who were not in that database and people who were. Again, the reason there's records that were not migrated are because they contain errors, and we did not want to put those public with those errors. So the team is also working very hard on what was not published to validate, to make sure that those errors are corrected. I think we have a very good handle on what those necessary corrections are, and again, expect to make those updates in the coming months. Having said all that, I wanted just to give you an approximate ratio of records that needed to be corrected. And a rough estimate is that about 4.5% of records that we have published needed to be corrected, and most of them were corrected on the September 1 release. They will, of course, also continue to be corrected as necessary in the coming days when we publish additional data. Let me also mention that we have gotten requests to modify previously submitted and validated records that represent, in my opinion, a different category. We are less prone to, but need to have discussions about how to and whether to correct these type of records. In this example, we of course have to look to our regulations to speak to how we're going to deal with these categories. The first example is people who recently retired. There's a number of people in that category. They were perhaps certified at the time that they submitted records for them, and now want to see those records taken down. Our regulations, however, speak that the records of people in this category will be public for up to 3 years from their first certification or last recertification. So because the certification is prospective, and frankly because it says so in our regulations, we are not inclined to bring down records of people who recently retired because they are technically capable of going to another department and be hired because their certification does not expire until a future date. However, when a person is not recertified because they've been retired, we expect that those records then, will come down. We have also been beginning to get requests about for changing a category that was previously selected and properly submitted. We also have claims that in some instances, the incident should not have been reported to post, even though it was reported, or does not constitute discipline. But in these instances, they were indeed reported and validated. It's the right record to the right person, and is now public. And in these two categories, as commissioners can probably agree, we are a little bit more skeptical of making those corrections. Now, that's not to say that we will not make them if it's warranted, but if the record was properly submitted to us and validated, and now they want to change it, we really need to ascertain the reasons as really being legitimate reasons, and not just the fact that they don't like how it looks in a public database. There's another category that I will speak to that merits some good analysis, and that is there's instances for letters of counseling under similar procedures, the state police has this process in which they document verbal reprimands. And those reprimands are expunged or are eligible for expungement after a period of time. I believe for the state police, that's 1 year. So they have requested that if it's been more than a year, that those records could come down. And if one goes through the analysis in our regulations, at a first instance, my read is that they should be taken down. But again, the analysis needs to be done in accordance with the regulations, the dissemination of information regulations, in other words, 555 CMR 8.00. When a matter gets resolved in favor of the officer, then it doesn't become, and in this matter, in this example, expunged, then it's no longer part of this database. There are other agencies that may have a similar procedure, and again, we'll look to make sure that that is being implemented consistently, and again in accordance with our regulations. We are not yet doing a lot of these corrections. Again, these need to be analyzed in accordance with those regulations. But we continue to log those requests as they come in to our general mailbox. Just a little bit more on data not yet published. As I mentioned, it's where there was a mismatch of date of birth, name, and NPTC ID number, or there's missing data, or where the template request required an entry, or a type of field, a date, for example, and it was not provided, or the data was overwritten. All of those went to an error table, and we worked, several times to continue these corrections. We still have some to go. There were 5 agencies, to our knowledge, that they were not migrated in their entirety because of one or more errors, as above. Examples include, well, those 5 agencies are Everett, Cambridge, Brookline, Chatham, and Greenfield. And we now know the reason that they were not migrated, and expect to migrate them again, as I mentioned, in the coming months, in the coming releases. Also, something since the first release, there was immediate feedback about the appearance that when we reported initially that somebody may have had a record from a prior agency where they were working in a current agency. We're now reporting the current agency where they work and the agency that reported the discipline. And I think that was important to a number of people, and that is now implemented. We also are reporting the reasons for this did not happen in the first release, but now the September 1 release includes reasons for why the discipline was not administered. Again, that was not the majority of records, but that was very important for some of those records. And those now include whether the discipline was reduced, or perhaps a termination was reinstated by an arbitrator or an appointing authority, and that's important data that needed to be also included. We believe that's been implemented and will continue to do that. I should also mention that we have a request in one of the letters that we received, in particular from the Fraternal Order of Police, that post act as somewhat of an arbitrator for disagreements between an agency and an officer. We have taken the approach that all of this information, we deal with agencies. We have leverage over the agencies as to submitting this data. And however, we do understand that in some instances there's disagreement as to how something should be characterized. And I can say that at least for now, we had not anticipated this to be doing this. We will have to analyze what that would mean and come back to you with recommendations at a future meeting. So for future releases, I will just mention that at least for now, we envision two data sets that will be released, in the coming months. The first set includes records that were validated but not released, and then the estimate is around 500 records. And the second set includes records that required further validation, and that stands at about 400 records. Our current plan is, as I mentioned, to have future releases and have a robust way of verifying with agencies a triple time, because we've done so a couple of times in the past, before we make these releases, ensure that that data is as up to date as possible, and we'll continue in that way. As I mentioned before, but I think it bears repeating that we have identified maybe 4.5% of the records that required updates and corrections. And given this majority, this nearly 96% that records that have been validated, our recommendation is not to remove the entire database from the website and update constantly as we always anticipated. However, I do want to acknowledge that request and want to turn it over at this time to you, Madam Chair, to see if you want to have a discussion about this, or of course, if there's any questions from commissioners on this matter. Let me stop sharing my screen, Commissioner, if you give me a minute so that you can see. Commissioner Ellison, oh, sorry.
Thank you. If I might, just 1 minute, Commissioner Ellison first. Let me thank all of the members of the staff who have worked so hard on this project. And I certainly at this time will turn to the members of the commission. You've given us a very thorough analysis of what has occurred, Enrique. I thank you for that. And let me now turn and see what the comments are from my fellow commissioners. I think I saw Commissioner Ellison's hand in the air first, and then Commissioner Calderon.
Yes, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to echo that most informative report from our executive director. I agree. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned the letters went out to this group. Did those letters also go out to the previous A through H group of certifications, the same correspondence? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, well, remember, Commissioner, that we had an updated system with our portal in which when we did A through A, we did issue individual letters to officers, but we asked agencies to distribute those letters on our behalf, and that happened for the most part, but not. I cannot say 100%. And in some instances, unfortunately, timely letters, people who were perhaps not certified or were going to be under further review, they did not get those letters on a timely manner. So we changed our approach for the I through P certification, and we are now sending those letters directly to individuals and copying the departments. And we've been getting requests, from departments to make sure that they are getting those copies, and they're all available in the portal, and we're directing them to see them there. So that's a change, and I think an important one.
Yeah, thank you. No, it wasn't. I didn't see it across the board with other departments weren't complying in the same manner. So, so going forward, that will be the standard, that it will come from the post, and not just relying on their agency
Right.
for that notification. The other question I had on the certifications, sir, how are we capturing individuals? For instance, we have independent operators, and one of the big things is constables, right? Who have police powers. Are we able to track whether or not those folks are certified, and if they are they operating with police powers without being certified?
They should not be operating under police powers with, having police powers, arresting people or taking their liberties or doing warrantless searches, for example, if they have not been certified by post. That's That's the principle. There are a number of constables still operating, serving process, and I guess that's still legitimate. They can continue to do so, but they cannot arrest anybody until they're certified. They're not
So-
included in the numbers. Sorry, Commissioner. They're not included in the numbers that I just gave you. We have not certified any constable at this time.
So I guess my follow-up to that, and then is there anything that's sent to them, letting them know that they're not in compliance, so that if there is an incident, that they were made aware of their status?
We're going to discuss, subject to time, a guidance that we are going to provide to commissioners. It comes under the General Counsel's update. So we're going to discuss something later on this
Okay.
meeting.
All
Commissioner.
right.
And I
Thank
think
you.
with that, Commissioner Calderon, please.
Thank you. Executive Director, I appreciate the identifying and modifying the law enforcement agencies that have been identifying, that being departments and the union groups, identifying mistakes or things that need to be changed on the disciplinary database. So I want to say thank you on our behalf of that. Also, if I can question, we mentioned the state police, their written warning protocol that they utilize. Am I to understand that we're attempting to adhere to that when that policy goes into effect, whatever the time period is, then they will be modified in the database as well? Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. I mean, the read of our regulations is that when a matter is vacated or expunged, it should no longer be, reflected in the database.
Okay.
In the particular process of the state police, actually what needs to happen is they are eligible. They get these letters of counseling, they put them in their file, and actually the individual officer has to request expungement, and it's only available after a year. And that it's only eligible for expungement after a year.
Okay.
So if they request those expungements, which I gotta believe everybody will, then they will be expunged.
Okay, I appreciate that. The policy group met yesterday, and naturally, I've read all the letters from MACLEA, the state police, MASCOP, et cetera. So that's one of the things I wanted to make sure I understood and clarified for them. Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
If
And I'm not sure who,
if I may, there may be parallels to that, Commissioner Calderoni, that actually may already exist or frankly may develop after this, and we'll treat them, in similar ways.
No, again, I say thank you. I know that Boston sent some in and they were modified and repaired appropriately. So I appreciate what the team is doing. Thank you.
thank you. I'm not sure who had his or her hand up next. I'll go at this point to Commissioner Bluestone, please, and then Commissioner Baker.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize from my perspective what a long and thoughtful process this has been, with great concern for the accuracy of these records. And from a statistical standpoint, I think we've understood that releasing records in a database of this magnitude with, I believe, over 4,000 records, that there would be a certain amount of measurement error that would be unavoidable. And have had several discussions as a group about what level of error would be reasonable. And so I just want to commend you for getting to the point where, we're looking at about 95% accuracy in this database. I think that's very impressive. And also looking at the turnaround from August 22nd to September 1st to make those corrections is really commendable. And so, thank you to all of the staff who made that happen so quickly. On a separate note, I guess my question is around the issue of the individuals who have retired, who are asking whether their records could be removed from the database. And my question would be, have we considered the option of having an option for officers to request that they end their certification and could then be able to have their records removed.
That's an excellent idea, Commissioner Bluestone, that we have not considered, frankly. It could be, we could look at where in our regulations that could fit, either with existing regulations or with guidance or amending the regulations. But I don't know if Randy, you would like to expound on that any more?
Right. Well, the way that they're written now, there's essentially an assumption that if somebody received a certification within the last 3 years, that certification is still good. So I think, Commissioner, you're raising a wrinkle on that. What if the person has relinquished their certification? And there are things built into the regulations that would allow the commissioners to vote to make exceptions and things like that. So that's something that if the commissioners are interested in adopting something like that, we can prepare something for consideration, and the commission could decide to take that step.
I suspect that there is interest in your looking further into that particular issue, looking at the body language suggesting assent to Hanya's, Commissioner Bluestone's comments. But let me turn now, if I may, to Commissioner Baker for questions or comments.
Yes, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. First off, good morning to everybody. I just want to make a comment about the errors in the list. One of the other commissioners referred to 95% correctness, which is pretty impressive, 95%. But if you are an officer that should have not had been on that list, and you were on that list in this day and age, that never comes back, no matter what you do, no matter what corrections you make. So moving forward, we have to be 100% before this list goes out. I think moving forward, we have to notify the chiefs, make sure we do an audit basically before we release this. I understand this pressure and people want to see this list, but it's more appropriate to be right than to be out there and to get it out. We have to make sure the list is correct, and the list needs to be 100% correct, because one error with an officer, that never comes back. And the other thing is, I wanted to mention the letters of counsel. A letter of counsel is basically having a conversation with your employee. I would challenge every commissioner on this board. Have you ever had a boss have a conversation with you because you did something incorrectly? That's not discipline. And to publicly put out that your boss had a conversation with you, I just feel is inappropriate. So I'm glad the commission is actually looking at it as a whole. I just want to kind of shed some just basic light on that we got to be able to have a conversation with our employees without it ending up on a public disciplinary list.
Thank you. Commissioner Luma, please.
Yes, thank you. So I guess, Director Zuniga, I have more questions about the claims that incidents should not have been reported or submitted or constitute discipline. So, if there is a incident that was reported and it was reported in error for whatever reason, what's the process in order to address that? I'm talking about prior to the publishing of the records. Is there an opportunity for the agency to kind of request that claims, kind of have issues with claims that have been submitted? What can they do about that?
Thank you, Commissioner. So are you speaking about historical records or also going forward?
Can you give examples of what people are requesting in regards to claims that should not have been submitted and that do not belong on this published list now?
Yeah, it's instances relative to discipline that where they said there was a written reprimand or a suspension, and now they're telling us that was an oral reprimand and that shouldn't be there. Now we're looking at a spreadsheet that they submitted to us where they selected those instances. So this is what I mentioned that, we're a little bit more skeptical about that. But we can look at the underlying, facts, whatever may be, all the details besides the summary. Admittedly, these summaries are just that, summaries, and we can recategorize them if necessary. That we don't want to put out information that is wrong. And by the way, there was we typically dealt with staff level people. The person who does the IA at the local PD, etc. Or in some instances, data people. So it's conceivable that there was real errors in just data entry errors.
Mhm.
So we'll change that. There's another instance in which people say, well, I reported this to you as a sustained incident, but in our opinion, that doesn't constitute discipline. And again, we have to look at those instances. I will mention the city of Springfield. They view retraining as not discipline. Our view, because we read in the statute, something that we can do. Retraining is a legitimate form of progressive discipline. So again, we can come back to you as to these separate examples, with recommendations as to whether we take a position on them or not.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, like, if there's such a discrepancy about what constitutes discipline versus what does, then do we have some training gaps or concern? Maybe we need people to better understand what the regulations are in regards to what constitutes discipline. If people are now saying, well, that shouldn't have been on there. I think the retrain is the perfect example of that. So what are things that we need to be doing so people better understand what they should be submitting versus what they shouldn't be submitting?
Right. Now, the regulations, by the way, do include some exceptions for complaints, internal or external, that are required to be submitted to post. We're going to have more guidance later at this meeting, more discussion on that. We get those questions often as to what constitutes a matter that should be reported to post. Minor matters, we made exceptions, but yeah, there's the natural evolution of what gets reported to post. If it turns out to be discipline or not is also a discussion that we should have.
Commissioner Luma, have you any additional questions? Sorry.
I'm all set. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Kazarosian, please.
Thank you. I just want to even just clarify for myself or everyone that we don't create the records, we report the records. And I understand the need and the importance for 100% accuracy, but there are a lot of human beings involved in developing this database, whether it's from Post, whether it's from the reporting agencies, whatever. And because we're human beings, there's never going to be a 100% accuracy, but we can certainly strive to get as close to it as we possibly can. And I think as the first rollout, when we're actually closer to 96% accuracy, I have to commend everyone for the work they've done and for the commitment to keep reviewing the information. And as we're notified that maybe something was reported that was inadvertent or that would be preferred not to be posted in the database, it's an ongoing process that will be constantly evolving and constantly corrected or updated. So I think that's just important for everyone to understand. Our goal and our mandate from Post is transparency. And in weighing all of these circumstances and everybody's interests, I think this is the most important step in transparency. And I think that everyone has done, the agencies, the reporting agencies, and our staff in developing and reporting the information we receive, and the validation process, which has been excruciating and time consuming. I think people have to understand this has been an extraordinary, Herculean task. So I commend everyone and hope that people have patience as we continue to roll this out and develop it and hone it.
Thank you. Commissioner Talley, please. You're muted.
Sorry. Upon hearing all this information, I have to question, is there a validation or filtering process before it's accepted into the system, or validation is done after everything's been submitted?
There is a number of validations that happen prior to something being released, Commissioner. What I mentioned, that process, that exact match that we did for every record in our import tool. Whenever there were errors, we would send back to the agencies to correct and resubmit to us. So there's embedded QA/QC in this prior to any publication. And that's one reason why there's data that's still missing. We still need to validate. They're sitting in an error table, as I mentioned, of data that we have not yet published, because there's at least one error in that record, and we have been working to correct those as well.
Well, I understand from a data perspective. I'm talking about content as to what people are actually putting in there.
There were very detailed instructions as to what to put in this resubmission. And there's regulations that govern what's reportable to post. I won't fault anybody from not being very familiar with the regulations, but there's written instructions on the template itself as to what was reportable to post. If I could, but back to the content, to the notion of content. This data is also very dynamic. As I try to summarize, maybe they report something to us by January 31st, which was this latest, the deadline for the data on disciplinary records or historical disciplinary records, and something changes in May. And here we are after all our validation efforts and publish something, and they say, okay, but something changed. Commissioner Ellison. These one of the challenges, and Commissioner Casarosian was touching on this through her comments, is that the data is very dynamic. As soon as we are validating, and we're dealing with 440 agencies, which is a challenge in and of itself. So as soon as we put out some information, there may be instances which now need to be updated. I will mention this also, Commissioner. We are working very hard on implementing a portal for all things complaints. We have implemented a portal on the certification effort. So there is, in the near future, there will be a portal where agencies, log in, update information in real time, and we have it up as updated as possible, because we can then download data from that portal. We had to do this submission of spreadsheets because the statute was very aggressive on the deadlines for submitting these initial records, and so we had to send these spreadsheets, get them submitted back to us, because at the time we did not have the technical infrastructure to essentially manage all of these data. So it's a little bit of the legacy of having to have done an interim solution while we were developing the permanent solution.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ellison, please.
Yeah, I don't know if this might be helpful to Commissioner Talley as well as Commissioner Luna. And I give you a quick example and of why they're probably getting all these documents. In Boston, for instance, an oral reprimand, one would think it would just be verbally communicated to the officer and not documented. That is now documented in a form and then sent over to the post as part of that disciplinary packet. So when you're seeing that in there, and there's no way for the officer to appeal it because an oral reprimand cannot be appealed. That is part of their folder now, which most people, when you think about being given an oral reprimand, is communicated to you orally and there's no documentation of it. That is being documented and sent over. And it's how do you then evaluate that, because you can't not see what you're seeing.
Thank you. Was there another commissioner's hand in the air? Yes, Commissioner Calderon, please.
Thank you. Jumping back in on this, I know when we first discussed and took a vote on it, this was the point that I was attempting to make, representing the law enforcement groups, is that there was a lot of concern about a possible inaccuracy. And of course, handling the amount of departments that we are is a Herculean task. I understand that. Maybe we can develop some type of checks and balances system where we work even more closely, if that's possible. Maybe bring in the bodies that represent the rank and file along with the departments to maybe do a double check before we release the second phase of data. Clearly, the disciplinary record database is up there now. And again, I say thank you for making the changes that we've made thus far, and we're going to continue to do that. But maybe we can develop a process that works more closely with all the bodies as a double checks and balances to try to not have these mistakes in the future. I just thought I should offer that out there as we continue moving forward.
Thank you. And I think with that, we have had an extraordinary breadth of comment and question on this issue. I think it's quite clear that we will have this on the agenda on a regular basis, including next month. And I think unless there is anything else with regard to this issue that any of the commissioners feel that we need to address today, given everything else that is on our agenda, we probably should move forward. But again, let me commend the staff for all their hard work on this issue and commend the commissioners for the extent of thought that they've given to this extremely complex issue. Charlene, excuse me, Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one last comment. I understand the need for checks and balances, also understanding we're an independent agency. But I also want to just highlight that, you know, we have to be as transparent and honest as possible, and checks and balance. There's a level of investments from the public as well. I know that we're talking about primarily law enforcement officers, but we have to make sure we're accountable to the public and citizens as well, and civilians. So I want to, whatever checks and balances, I want to make sure that that is recognized as well.
Thank you. And I
So,
think,
Madam Chair, if I may, there's a few more slides on the presentation from finance. I just want to make sure if there's I don't seem to hear an appetite from commissioners to bring the database down, but instead continue the way that we have been doing. I just wanted to make sure to give an opportunity for anybody to object to that, or just continue with that assumption.
I think you can continue with that assumption based on the extent of the comments and questions.
Thank you. Can I share back my screen for the finance report?
Certainly.
I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Well, thank you very much. So now we have, as you know, a few months ago, we did end the FY23 fiscal year, and closing out, the books officially close in October next month. But of course, we also started a new fiscal year, FY24, and we just had the governor had signed the budget back, the new budget back in August. So I just wanted to go through just a few updates. Your packets do include a memo that has much more detail, as well as some org charts and so forth for the agency. And then, of course, I'm always available for questions at any time. So on this first slide here, just talking about FY23 activity, we were projecting total spending at around $7 million. Actual spending came in at $6.6 million. You may recall we had two accounts. $5 million was for our regular operations. That was in the operating budget. And then there was a $2.9 million worth of unspent balance from the prior fiscal year, which we were going to dedicate exclusively to the Salesforce IT solution, and which we have indeed done that. You'll notice there is a leftover balance here from regular operations at approximately 1.3 million. Now, for the longest time, we kept telling you and informing you in commission meetings that we were forecasting an unspent balance of around $850,000. So the actual balance ended up being about $400,000 north of that to 1.3 million. Most of this expansion is attributable to Salesforce coming in under budget, some of the expenses there, as well as TSS overestimating some chargeback services that they provide for Post. Next slide, please. So just a quick summary of the FY24 spending plan. The Finance and Administration team had recently met with the Commissioner's Treasurer, Commissioner Ellison, as well as the Executive Director in order to review spending plans for FY24, the forthcoming fiscal year, or the present fiscal year, rather. They were submitted as per state finance law to A&F as of last night. Now, you'll recall that the assigned budget consisted of a total amount of funding for Post at 8.5 million. That's the blue column there. When you add in the 1.3 million of the unspent balance from FY23, that gives Post total available funding at $9.8 million. Now, since the $1.3 million rollover is one time in nature, we probably won't be seeing that again. But we did receive that through the legislature because they do realize we're a startup and we did need some flexibility and extra assistance. So we did try to keep most of this $1.3 million in one-time spending to unanticipated recurring spending, for example, unanticipated payroll, for example, and then, of course, other one-time items that specifically in the IT category. Next slide, please. Just some of the highlights of FY24 spending. Payroll, of course, as with all agencies, is usually the highest. So right now we're looking to predict about 46 employees by the end of the FY24 fiscal year. That's an additional 5 more than we had originally had forecast, which was at 41. And those 5 are actually enumerated in an org chart that's included in your packets, as well as in this particular presentation. I'll get into that in a little bit. Information technology spending has come down a little bit because most of the core development of the Salesforce IT solution is complete. Now we're pretty much working on applications as well as further enhancements and so forth. There's still a lot more to do, but the spending won't be as high as it was last year. And then, of course, our office space, which some of you did see last week when we were able to proverbially cut the ribbon, 84 State Street. And of course, the new space that we have here is a much larger space, 9,000 square feet. So, of course, the cost is going to be more than we had over at Regis, where we only had 1,000 square feet on 100 Cambridge Street. So we're looking at a total cost of about $580,000 this fiscal year. Of course, that does include some crossover payments to Regis, our old property, about $26,000. But it doesn't include any of the one-time furniture, fixtures, and other equipment expenses that we will inevitably have down here. Next slide, please. This is the forecasted organizational chart. I won't certainly review all of it. There's a lot going on here. I just want to point out to you that of the 46 total positions, 36 are filled as of today. 5 are open, and then of course in red, bright red there, you see the 5 new requests, and those are the 5 new positions that we were adding on top of the originally forecast 41. And this is obviously due to extensive workloads and discussions that we have had with various division heads. Once again, your packets do contain more detail. And then finally, the Post moving to the new permanent space, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. much more space for public meetings and hearings. We're actually going to be spending some time with Owen, our Chief Technology Officer, to get some of these some of these hearing rooms rather outfitted with audio-visual technology, so that it'll be a little bit much more professional when we're having hearings, and if we have to have hearings in certainly in person as opposed to over video. And then, of course, we will be utilizing the hybrid model, which the state, the Commonwealth has endorsed, and we'll basically hoteling our space here. So if you need a space, you just basically make a reservation through the hoteling software that we'll have on our phones, and then we can reserve a space for the day or reserve a conference room or what have you. And I turn it back to you.
Madam Chair, that concludes the report, the Executive Director report.
Thank you. Let me just ask if any of the commissioners have any additional questions. And let me also thank Eric and his staff for all of their hard work, and our treasurer, Commissioner Ellison, for his collaboration with them. I think this report has been very helpful. And I think I see Commissioner Bluestone's hand in the air, please.
Yes, thank you. I just had two quick questions. The first is with the hybrid model and the expenditure for office space, I'm just wondering how we ensure that the space is being well utilized. I understand the efficiency issue, but how do we ensure that we're utilizing that space on a regular basis?
So DCAM, we worked very closely with DCAM in procuring this particular area. The office that you see that we're in now is actually designed for 30 employees. So we know that by the end of FY24, we're probably going to be around 46. Probably even more than that as we go into the future. Of course, we want to make sure that we do this incrementally in terms of onboarding more staff and so forth. So as long as we retain, around approximately 50 employees for a space that's designed for 30, then we know that we're being somewhat efficient in terms of using this particular space. Now, of course, keep in mind that the rents have also drastically gone down in this area than from pre-pandemic, of course. So and again, that was probably because of the pandemic. So that's another thing too, that there is a certain amount of savings that we are realizing there as well. Also, the other commissions that some are not completely formed yet, that were part of the police reform law, they also will be allowed to share space with us down here as well. For example, SPED, that commission shares space with us here. So there are definitely some opportunities too going forward. If we find that we're going to be a smaller agency and not expand too much, then the other option is there are other small commissions and agencies out there that would also need to have some space, and they could piggyback off ours. We've actually, I have mentioned that to DCAM in the past, and that is something that agencies do in Grossen.
Thank you. So under the hybrid model, is it voluntary to come utilize the space, or is there a way that we ensure people come in and actually utilize the space, or is it, how does that get determined?
Sure.
I think Enrique has been.
Yeah, let me take that. Commissioner Bluestone, we are contemplating what other agencies have done relative to making certain days required, or certain meetings, or certain team meetings to occur in person, to take advantage of the efficiencies that happen when people are in the office, and many things don't need to be, let's say, scheduled or purposely, and there could be a lot more exchange in real time. We could not have done that in the prior space. There was just no way of reasonably asking people to come other than just on a voluntary basis, given just the inadequacy in terms of capacity that we had then. But we are in that position right now. We'll have conversations with directors to have certain days that their team all comes in, or certain times that work for people in the best, most up-to-date way.
Thank you. And just the last question is just on the organizational chart. I'm just curious, the sort of the hearing officer circle, what is the reporting for that group? Who do they report to anybody? They're sort of out there on the organizational chart, and
Yeah, I think that's by design, Commissioner. They don't report to anybody. They are meant to be an independent viewpoint. If they report to anybody, it's really the commission and the appointment of those, the assignment of those hearing officers is done by the chair for practical reasons, just to do it in between meetings and whatnot. So you will be seeing going forward, actually at the executive session later this morning, certain some of those hearing officers are recommending now for you to consider and vote on. So if they report to anybody, that would be you, but you the commission, but they're facilitating work for you essentially.
So
Yeah.
I would just suggest that just in terms of the organizational chart, that maybe that's indicated. I understand their independence and the importance of that, but if there were some kind of problem or issue, it does seem like it should be clear that there could be some oversight.
We'll follow up on that, Commissioner.
Commissioner Luma, please.
Does this org chart just reflect FTEs? Are there any contractors here, or do we still have contractors?
We do. We have a few. The only contractors we have right now, Commissioner, are we have a few legal interns, and they're set up as contractors for payroll purposes. They would not be included on here as contractors are not included in the FTE calculation.
Okay, but we so that's all the contractors we have currently, right?
And that is correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, please? If not, let me move on to item 4 on the agenda, and ask that these additional presentations be as limited as possible, given all the additional information and issues that we have to address and our executive session later today. So item number 4, please, the credentials for law enforcement officers with post-certification number. Enrique?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief, but we updated the commission at last commission meeting, but we could not take a vote because of quorum about a proposal from the Mass Chiefs Association to reflect the post-certification number and expiration date in the credentials for officers that every officer carries. The proposal is outlined in the packet, in the memo that's included in the packet. It carries an incremental cost. It's a very rough estimate, anywhere between $80,000 to $100,000 a year that post would have to bear. But it would be the benefit would be to have everybody carry a credential that's official and would include the certification status and expiration date. It is something that is being proposed for us to consider, for you all to consider. If there's an appetite to explore that, that's what we come here for you to ask. If you would rather keep us the way we have, which is just issuing letters, certification letters, and reflecting the certification status and expiration dates of people in our public databases, I guess that would be the alternative. So we come here to ask if there's appetite for us to do that. I think there's benefits, but an argument could be made either way, frankly.
Let me hear from other commissioners as to their views on this. Yes, Commissioner Luma?
You could give an example of when officers would have to produce their credentials. Like, why can't they just submit a letter? Why would they need to produce a credential? For what purpose? From the post commission.
Yes, there would be no post commission logo, let's say, or there would just be a post commission registration, certification number, and an expiration date. They are not required in Massachusetts to display them, Commissioner. They don't display them currently. They do have them in their wallets, I guess, in their possession. I suppose if they needed to be identified as certified, they could produce that. But frankly, you know, a uniform and a badge, does that for everybody. So it's a good question as to what might be the benefit. I see a big benefit in reminding everybody that there's a certification, every officer that there's a certification number and an expiration date that they should all be cognizant of. And if their certification status was ever questioned by, I don't know, a lawyer, or they could produce that. They could produce that credential.
Let me ask members of the commission who are connected with law enforcement there, if they might comment on this issue. If I could start with Commissioner Ellison, please.
Yeah, I really don't see the benefit because, I have an ID, and if there for some reason that was suspended or whatever, no one would know whether or not that ID was valid or not. It would just say who I was and the number, or whether or not that was suspended. I'm not sure I see the need for the expense or the benefit that it would provide.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon.
Yes, I concur. I agree with what Larry's saying. It seems like it's not necessary and an unnecessary expense. I agree with Larry.
And Commissioner Baker. Commissioner Baker, you're muted. All right. I think perhaps at the moment he's unable to comment on this. Is there any additional question or comment from other commissioners on this issue? Yes, Commissioner Kajrosian.
I would also agree with Commissioners Calderon and Ellison that I don't see the need for it. And again, any identification that you have is only as good as the date it comes out, and it's impossible to keep it updated. Whereas if someone really needs to know whether an officer has been decertified or whatever, there are other means to do that. So I agree. I don't think the expense is warranted.
Commissioner Bluestone.
I just wanted to weigh in and say I also agree in that if we were going to consider that, then I would hope that we could look into how to make those two dates more consistent, since the expense seems to come from the fact that they're very different timelines.
Right. It seems to me that we have the majority of the commissioners have expressed their view that we need go no further with this issue at this time. So unless there is any contrary motion that anybody wants to put before the commission, I would suggest that we no longer, we do not further discuss it at this point, and we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I agree as well. We no need to go any further at this time. I had to step away for a moment.
That was Commissioner Baker. Thank you. Thank you. And with that, let me move on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is our update from our legal counsel, Randy Ravitz.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Okay, the first thing that I will be presenting on is a revised version of the draft guidance to law enforcement agencies and prosecuting offices regarding 2 sets of regulations, 555 CMR 1, which generally speaking deals with the processing of complaints by law enforcement agencies and the commission's own adjudicatory process, and 555 CMR 6, which governs the use of force. Now, just by way of reminder, this draft guidance was discussed previously, but the goals in developing it were to address questions and suggestions that came from both inside and outside the commission, and to clarify and fill in details regarding provisions that are in those regulations, but not to create new obligations. So this is not creating new regulations. It's just providing clarification. Also to define terms and concepts, particularly where there have been questions raised, and some of the definitions that have been proposed are based on definitions found in other sources. And to call attention to how provisions found in different statutes and sets of regulations work in conjunction and impact each other. Now I'll just review the path to developing these regulations, and partly to show how much opportunity for public comment there's been. Back in April, an initial draft was included in the public meeting packet. The executive director invited comments at the public meeting, and the packet was placed on the commission's website. Then in June, a revised draft was included in the meeting packet. At the meeting, a presentation was given, feedback was invited, and the packet was placed on the website. Then an invitation to comment was posted on the website and sent to interested parties. In July, comments were received. The invitation to comment was sent to additional offices that we thought might be interested, and the deadline for commenting was extended. In August, more comments were received. There was a second revised draft prepared showing changes based largely on the comments, and that was included in the meeting packet. At the meeting, there was a general description of the process provided because we didn't have a quorum, so we didn't engage in a full discussion, and further comments were invited. The packet was placed on the website again. And then in September, most recently, this revised draft was again included in the meeting packet, and now I'll be discussing the revisions and related steps. I'll highlight the key revisions that have been made since the last draft was presented. There's been a lot of discussion of what are minor and non-minor matters, and requests for clarification about that. So this guidance says that presumptively non-minor matters include those that the legislature or the commission has previously determined must or may warrant a preliminary inquiry, some form of discipline, a referral to other agencies for investigation or possible prosecution, or special treatment in record keeping or reporting. So in the initial draft, there was a list of presumptively non-minor matters, and it was basically assembled based on comments that were received. But in order to keep this to something that provides clarification on existing provisions as opposed to creating new ones, that section was revised here so that now, as you see on the slide, it basically collects things that are already found in the commission's governing statute and in its regulations that reflect a determination by the legislature or by the commission that something is non-minor because there's a preliminary inquiry required, because there's discipline required, or a referral or special treatment in record keeping or reporting. Next, the guidance would clarify that where a credibility determination by an agency regarding an allegation that it receives may not have been made at that point, that it's the allegation does not rise to the level of a complaint, but it's an initial report. And the reason for that change is that some people pointed out that the term complaint in the regulations has a specific meaning. It means an allegation that has been determined to be credible. And so that we should make that clear and be consistent in our language that until that point in time, it is an initial report, the allegation. It's not yet a complaint until it's been determined to be credible. This would also clarify that an agency should provide an explanation where its own credibility determination takes more than 3 business days to be made. The original draft of the guidance said that an explanation should be provided if that takes more than a few days. So some people said it would be better to be more precise about that. The guidance would explain that in assessing unprofessionalism, sources that may be helpful include those cited in the Commission's recertification regulations. So those, as the returning members will recall, there were certain sources that the Commission found to be good sources to look to in determining character and fitness, and those are sources that could also be looked to in assessing unprofessionalism. Then the guidance would also call attention to a section of another set of regulations. It's 555 CMR 8.04, that's in the Database and Dissemination of Information Regulations, that requires agencies to notify officers when it reports certain information to the Commission. The guidance would also clarify that within an agency, the head of the agency may delegate certain reporting functions, but would still remain personally accountable for the reporting. The statute refers to the agency head, so that is why the regulations refer to an agency head, but this makes clear the agency head can delegate certain functions, but remains accountable. If there is no internal resolution policy, the guidance would clarify that the head of the agency should refer a matter to an internal investigation unit or officer. And if the top two officials are disqualified, another individual should be designated and should consult with the Commission regarding the reporting process, how things will proceed. The guidance would clarify that the Commission can review conduct that predates its own establishment, or as to which a statute of limitations would bar a judicial action. There are some things in the guidance that say that old matters like that that fit within the parameters of the guidance do not necessarily need to be evaluated by law enforcement agencies, but this would make clear that the Commission can still evaluate those. It would also clarify that the Commission will ordinarily forward an initial report, meaning an allegation of misconduct, to the officer's agency, but it reserves the ability to decide that on a case-by-case basis. There are some provisions in the regulations that deal with confidentiality and referrals to prosecuting offices, and those largely implement the provisions of the statute that provide that information related to a preliminary inquiry is generally confidential, but it can be referred to a prosecuting office. So the guidance would explain that the regulations do not govern the conduct of those prosecuting offices, but that at the same time, the Commission requests that anyone who receives preliminary inquiry information that's been prepared or provided by the Commission consider steps to maintain the confidentiality to the extent appropriate, and appropriate takes into account any ethical or professional obligations that people have. Obviously, we're not asking people to violate those. And we also would request that the recipient of that information notify the Commission before disclosing it to others. Now, here's another area that's addressed in the guidance. In the regulations on the use of force, there's a definition of de-escalation tactics, and it says at the end, de-escalation shall include, but is not limited to, issuing a summons instead of executing an arrest where feasible. And there have been some questions raised about whether that imposes a requirement in all cases where it would be feasible to issue a summons instead of executing an arrest. And so the guidance would clarify that this last sentence was not intended to compel an officer to issue a summons in any particular circumstance, but simply highlights one approach that, if it's taken, would be considered a form of de-escalation. So if it's done, it's de-escalation, it qualifies as such, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be done in every situation or any particular situation. Now, there are some other things that are not addressed in the guidance that were things that were raised by people who offered public comments. And I should say that we really appreciated the public comments, and we took them very seriously, as I hope this reflects. But there are certain things that are not reflected in there, but that doesn't mean that they're not being addressed. They're just being addressed in a different way. And part of that is because, again, we were being careful here not to basically adopt new regulations. And we were also careful not to try to resolve things that may require more analysis, more discussion, the benefit of time and experience. So at the same time, we are taking other steps outside of this guidance, separate from the guidance. One is that we are submitting corrections to 555 CMR 1 to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office to fix certain formatting errors in the published version that may have been made by the Secretary's office in the publication process, and to correct citation errors and typo type things, including one that mistakenly refers to Section 4 of the statute that deals with certification, when it very clearly was intended to refer to Section 14, which concerns use of force. That was responsive to a public comment, and makes sense to correct that just to bring the published version of the regulations in line with what was discussed by the commission. We also are in the process of developing additional regulatory provisions concerning record keeping, reporting, and auditing of agency records, but in a place where they could be covered comprehensively and harmonized and presented together, which hopefully will be easier for people to comment on and easier for agencies to comply with. And that was a project that was discussed at the May 2023 meeting. We're also reevaluating the public complaint form, including its reference to possible bases for submitting complaints. Some people raised questions about whether the language could be refined there. We also have been talking about and taking steps to see how we can better inform those who are likely to obtain misconduct information, but who do not serve in law enforcement agencies, about their own ability to submit information to the commission, because they're prosecuting officers, for example, members of the MPTC, for example, that might receive this information, and they're not expressly referenced in the regulations. And we are continuing to develop other ways to outline and explain the complaint and adjudicatory processes, some of which you've seen in the materials that have been provided, such as flowcharts, diagrams, or other visual aids, video presentation, and other live presentations for groups. These are things that are in the works. Also, there are topics that have been raised that we continue to discuss and analyze and think about, including the range of matters that should be treated as non-minor, whether additional attention should be given to conduct that is threatening, intimidating, or retaliatory, whether within an agency or between members of an agency and members of the public, even if that's indirect. Matters involving youths, whether those deserve special additional attention. What it means for there to be a pattern of unprofessionalism, or for what it means for there to be misconduct. Should that be elaborated on further, or should that be left more open-ended? The treatment of anonymous complaints. There's been a lot of discussion about that. There are different views about that. So that's something we continue to discuss. And the range of items that are considered weapons under the regulations on use of force. In particular, there was a comment that OC spray should be considered a weapon. Right now, it's not under the regulations. And so that's something that just warrants more discussion going forward. So with all of that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and if the chair would like, I can entertain any questions or comments. Madam Chair, I think you're muted.
Shame on the chair. Let me thank you for that extremely comprehensive analysis and presentation, Randy, and those who have worked with you on this issue. Are there any questions or comments from my fellow commissioners? I don't think I see any hands in the air, and I think with that, we could perhaps then move on to the next item on the agenda.
I would just raise the question of whether there should be, whether there needs to be a vote to accept this, or whether there's essentially a consensus that this could be put on the commission's website and published in final form.
What have we done with guidance in the past? Refresh my recollection.
Well, this is something new. We really, there was the guidance on section 12 where there was a vote by the commissioners. But there's the guidance on the scope of chapter 6E and the range of people who are within scope. And that was voted on, but the fact is there have not been a lot of examples of guidance, and so it's still a relatively new procedure.
Commissioner Calderon?
If I could, Madam Chair, I'll make that motion now to have the commission vote on it and have these recommendations put forth. And in the future, maybe that's the protocol we want to follow, but whatever the commission wants to do, I'll make that motion if you wish.
Thank you.
I second it.
Thank you. Any additional question or comment? If not, let me ask for a vote. Commissioner Baker? I think he's Commissioner Baker.
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon. I'm sorry. You
Yes.
are affirmative. Commissioner Ellison.
Yes.
Commissioner Hall.
Yes.
And Commissioner Kazrosian was the second. Commissioner Luma.
Yes.
Mr. Talley.
Yes.
I'm also affirmative, so it's unanimously carried by the commissioners in attendance. Thank you. Next item, please. Again, Randy.
I will share my screen again. Another document that is in the packet is a draft guidance for constables and other law enforcement personnel regarding a set of regulations that was already adopted by the commission, which is 555 CMR 9. It just needs to be published by the Secretary of State's office, but the commission has already voted to adopt it. And that set of regulations deals with the initial certification of all officers and the certification of independently applying officers or self-sponsored officers. And as many people will recall, initially, the regulations included some additional provisions regarding constables in particular. Those were removed in light of public comments that were made. There are some things that remain that govern all law enforcement officers, so it would extend to constables as well as others. And there were some comments that gave us the impression that people could benefit from further guidance. So that is what this document is intended to provide. So here are the key points in the document. And this is consistent with the discussion that was had before the commission when it considered that new set of regulations. There's a definition in the regulations in section 9.032 of an arrest. And what it basically says is that an arrest includes certain types of conduct that involve physical contact, a coercive show of authority, a weapon, or another form of seizure. So the guidance would clarify that an arrest does not include the mere service of papers without more. That was something that seemed to be of interest to constables, that issue. Also, the guidance would clarify that a constable may obtain a certification under this new set of regulations. However, that certification would be active only while the individual serves as a law enforcement officer for a law enforcement agency under the terms of the regulations. And that's largely because it is in that situation that the individual would have the kind of supervision that the statute needs to contemplate. In other situations, the constable wouldn't have that. There is a provision of the regulations that prohibits an individual from executing an arrest or otherwise performing police duties and functions without being certified if the individual is serving as a law enforcement officer as defined in the statute and therefore in scope. And this was referred to, this issue was referred to earlier during the executive director's presentation. And so the guidance would clarify that a constable who executes an arrest without being certified would simultaneously become a law enforcement officer under the statutory definition. They would bring themselves in scope. and thus be subject to the statutory and regulatory scheme, and also violate that prohibition in the regulation. But at the same time, the regulatory provision does not apply to one who is not a law enforcement officer and not in scope at all. So, for example, a deputy or special sheriff who does not perform police duties and functions, that person is not within scope under the statute, and so they're not covered by that regulation. The guidance further states some things that the commission expects to do going forward, which is to continue working in collaboration with the MPTC, the Municipal Police Training Committee, on a certification process and probably other provisions regarding constables. And constables and others are invited to provide us with more thoughts and to discuss these matters more with us. It adds that the ideas provided are most helpful where they suggest specific changes to the text of a draft or they offer specific new language. We really find that very helpful. It helps us understand exactly what it is that a person is looking for, and it's taken very seriously, and really furthers the process when people can say, look, what we're asking for is a provision that says X, Y, and Z, and they tell us exactly what they want, gives us something to work with. So with that, I will stop sharing, and if the chair wishes, I can entertain any questions or comments.
Yes, of course. Any questions or comments?
And I suppose there too, if it's appropriate for there to be a vote to adopt this, then.
Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
And I'm sorry, who is it that moved? Commissioner Loomis, thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Commissioner Bluestone seconded it, first hand in the air. Any additional question or comment? If not, let me ask for a vote. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
And Commissioner Bluestone? I think you seconded it. Thank you. Commissioner Calderon? Commissioner Calderon? I think he may have had to jump. Commissioner Ellison?
Yes.
Commissioner Hall?
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Yes.
Commissioner Talley?
Yes.
And Commissioner Calderon?
Thank you. My apologies, everybody. Duty called there for a minute. I am a yes. Thank you.
And I'm as well. So that is carried, I believe, unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, please. The update on other regulatory action.
Thank you. This will be very brief. The commission had adopted a set of regulations, 555 CMR 11, which deals with regulatory action and advisory opinions. Just providing an update that those have been published, so they are now in effect. One thing that those regulations provided was that the staff was authorized to correct things like typos and obvious citation errors in regulations. So we've done that with respect to 555 CMR 8, and we included in the packet a version of that shows these few tiny little corrections that have been made. Also, we've noticed things like that, as I mentioned earlier, in 555 CMR 1 and 2. And so we're planning to request those as well, corrections to those as well. Again, we're talking about typo type things, citation errors, obvious mistakes. And then finally, the set of regulations that I just mentioned, 555 CMR 9, it's on its way to being published. We're about to file the papers to make those final and official. So that concludes that update.
Thank you very much, and all of those who have worked with you on that. Next item, workplace safety policy.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair. I will be handling that. Good morning, commissioners, and welcome Commissioner Hall and Reverend Talley. Let me first start by saying that the policy is not the entirety of the safety protocol at post. It's just an element and a policy that's intended to provide notice and the public with an idea as to what is permitted with regard to weapons. It was also in your packet previously. Because of the lack of a quorum, we were unable to address it. So there are a few additional matters I'd like to bring to your attention that have come up that I hope will inform you with being able to possibly take a vote today. And first, let me start by stating that the other agencies that were considered would include the Civil Service Commission, which uses the same policy as the Ethics Commission, and DCAM. Those agencies were chosen because they primarily deal with the same officers, the same public. They're most similar to the people we would see coming before our post-commission. I'd also like to ask you to give some consideration to the weapons or the things that are labeled as weapons, but also understand that a weapon will be anything that this commission deems to be a weapon or something that could cause harm in the room. Since the initial posting and listing of the packet to the public, we did receive one response asking about or somewhat challenging and questioning the fact that we have stated we cannot store weapons. That correspondence included the fact that weapons are stored at the federal courthouse and suggested that we reconsider and examine that policy. What we would like to make everyone aware of is that we don't have the appropriate personnel that could either escort or secure a weapon from a law enforcement officer. So that is the reason for the exclusion of storage. In your package, you will see that in 2009, the Civil Service Commission stated the same. And what you'll see there is the recognition that the state trooper who was at that time removed from Ashburton, they have other security there now. But at that time, because the state trooper was removed, they didn't have the ability to facilitate the storage of weapons. Well, we find ourselves in a similar situation. So with that, the policy as it stands has an effective date that is actually not effective. It's based upon the fact that it was in that previous packet in August. But with a vote from the commission, it would become effective upon this date. The wrinkle, however, in our policy is that we may not necessarily have an absolute ban. And that's what the commission should briefly discuss and consider. All of the other policies that this is based upon have a ban for every Civil Service Commission ethics. They ban everyone, including law enforcement officers, from coming into their commission facility. This would include our hearings. We have an in-person adjudicatory hearing, which won't actually be on our site this time, but as previously discussed, we will be having hearings at our offices. We also may have public hearings, and with you all as part-time commissioners, with robust full-time schedules with this commission, you still nevertheless attend our events and functions. So any hearings that you have as well would be covered by this policy. We have 3 law enforcement officers on our commission who frequently attend and participate with us and interact with the public. With that being stated, the policy that you currently have before you would not necessarily make a concession or consideration for the commissioners. Therefore, anything that this commission would want to address would need to be addressed in light of a vote that would basically accept the policy, make it effective, but also note who you think should be excluded from any absolute ban or prohibition of weapons. With that stated, sorry for the quick and brief outline and discussion, But now I'm available, Madam Chair, for any questions that this commission may have.
I wonder if we can just take down, Paul, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Calderon.
Yes, I think the general counsel for what she's saying and opening the door to the conversation. I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody that is either in the audience or to our commissioners. The 3 police officers that sit on the commission do carry their firearms. We are working while we're attending these meetings legally. And we're coming to and from our places of employment. And when we leave State Street, in the cases of the other officers, or Larry and myself, that are within the city of Boston confines, we are carrying under the law and under the color of our badge. And I would like to put a motion forward or create the discussion to start with about having the exception inside the regulation that the commissioners are allowed to carry.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Yes, Commissioner Ellison first, and then Commissioner Baker.
No, I would just concur with Commissioner Calderon in that regard.
Thank you,
For that
Commissioner.
carve out.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker.
Same, I have to agree. He put it exactly right. We're basically working. We're coming to and from, and we're under, performing our duties. So it just wouldn't be possible without a conversation to start and proceeding forward.
Thank you. Any other commissioners' comments or questions? If not, is there a Veronica, are you anticipating a motion today?
If possible, Madam Chair, yes.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion, Madam Chair.
And do you want to make the motion with regard to the modification?
Yes, please, to modify the policy prior to us voting for passage today to allow the exception for the 3 commissioners that are on the commission to be allowed to carry.
Is there any other, I'm sorry, is there a second to that specific motion? Commissioner, thank you. Any other question or comment? If not, let me ask for a vote. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison?
Yes.
Commissioner Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Kazarosian?
Yes.
Mr. Luma?
Yes.
Mr. Talley?
Yes.
And I'm also affirmative with that. I think the motion is unanimously carried. I'm sorry, Commissioner Calderon, did you have a question?
No, just a comment, Madam Chair. Thank you for the one more second. Thank you, commissioners. Speaks loudly to the confidence in the law enforcement officers in this group. So on our behalf, thank you. It continues the safety for all in and around the building. Appreciate that.
Thank you. All right, I think with that, there are no matters which were not anticipated by me as chair at the time of posting. So at this time, I will consider a motion to go into executive session in accordance with General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A5, in anticipation of discussion regarding the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct, and Chapter 30A, Sections 21A7, combined with General Laws, Chapter 6E, Section 8C2, and to the extent they may be applicable, General Law, Chapter 6, Sections 168 and 178, in anticipation of discussion regarding the initiation of preliminary inquiries and initial staff review relating to the same and regarding certain criminal offender record information. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? If not,
On readiness, there was a question that somebody had put in the Q&A. So I was wondering if anybody's going to address it.
Commissioner Talley, we don't address questions during our public meetings. Commissioner Enrique, do you want to just explain to the person in attendance how he or she might address the question of the commission? And thank you, Commissioner Talley, for that comment.
I will, and even though it's a question, it's more of a comment, but I will.
Could we take a 5-minute break before we go into executive session?
Yes, we are going to take a 5-minute break, but did we have a vote on going into executive session?
Oh, no.
Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Mr. Calderon,
Yes.
Mr. Ellison,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Kazarosian,
Yes.
Mr. Luma,
Yes.
Mr. Talley,
Yes.
and I'm also affirmative. And with that, this meeting is concluded. We will not return to the open meeting. We will take a 5-minute break before we go into executive session. Any other questions or comments from anybody in attendance? Let me thank all the members of the staff who have worked on all of the issues that we addressed today. Thank the presenters for their very thorough presentation, and thank the commissioners for their thoughtfulness in addressing the issues that we have considered today. And I think with that, this portion is concluded.